Now, there is another view of the crisis, and this is a very small category of people who are looking at it from this point of view. And they say the crisis is not caused from the side of the financial sector, but it is caused from the side of the real sector, though. Not the financial sector, but the real sector. And the real sector here in particular is the crisis is actually caused by income inequality. By income inequality. And of course it involves incomes across individuals as well as social classes of people. Now, why is this argument being made? And the case of the US is a striking one, though. In the US, it is suggested that the top 1% of the population, double its share of national income from 8% in the mid-1970s to almost 16% in the early 2000s. So now you have a small group of people who have access to enormous amounts of money. So what do you do with extra money? You want to expend that money, right? You want to expend that money, and you look for an intermediary to take the 10 ringgit of yours, to the 10 US dollars, to the 10 euro, to make it 200 euro for you. And how is that possible? It is done through the financial markets. It is done through the financial markets. So essentially, the money, the extra surplus money that was floating around was used to support the financial markets. Now, who was on the other side borrowing the money, though? Who was on the other side borrowing money? It was the middle classes. It was the middle class who was borrowing the money on the other side. And why were they borrowing the money? It's because the real median wage in the US has stagnated for the last 25 years. You have a huge middle class that is suffering from wage stagnation. That means to say, now what do they do? What would they do in order to acquire a better quality of life, better standard of living? And now, given that we live in this conspicuous consumption environment, so what do? Now, you have money available to you, and the middle class happily borrowed that money. Happily borrowed the money. So the middle class took advantage of credit that was made available easily in order to increase the quality of life and standard of living. And this group essentially supported its lifestyle, its very affluent lifestyle, by borrowing. Not from real wage increases, So essentially, the middle class households finance their quality of life from borrowed money. As a result of that, in the US, for example, household debt ratio to GDP increased from 48% of GDP in the early 1980s to 66% in 1997, and it hit 100% in 2007. So what we have is now this scenario being an unsustainable one, because once the middle class began defaulting on its debt repayment, the system collapsed. Now, so the root cause of the crisis was not the greed of bankers. I mean, they all contributing factors, but never in itself the cause of the crisis, though, and of course not derivatives and so on and so forth. So therefore, the point that I wanted to make is the crisis lies in the huge inequalities in income distribution. So governments solve the problem of lack of economic growth of the middle classes by making available cheap funds or cheap credit within the country and overseas. For example, 70% of global surplus savings went to the United States, though. So that tell you the amount of money that was going there to prop up the quality of life of the middle class and others as well. So what we're looking at is the unequal model of development. That's what at the heart of our question is, the unequal model of development, which have ramifications for political stability. Put differently, an unequal model of development cannot create a politically stable environment. Okay. Now, so therefore, in order to have an equitable development, we need to change our model, our economic model. That's the challenge that we have now. We had one big challenge in 1997 when we had the crisis, and then the next challenge is being posed to us right now, that we need a new model of development. That is the challenge that we have in order to stop all these unnecessary crises that is confronting us. Now, what do we do? And the answer is quite clear: increase real wages across the board. we need to increase real wages. And in Asia, in Southeast Asia, it's a problem because you have a very huge informal sector. A very huge informal sector. So this is a challenge that we have to deal with.